By the time I was 10, I realized that there was something different about me, and whatever it was that was different was wrong. From my earliest memories, my dad was calling me sissy, which in his generation meant faggot. And he would also say things like, well, there's goddamn Susie reading her books again. He was also physically abusive with me, much more so than he was with my brothers. The boys in school, daily I was being called a queer. I didn't have a clear understanding of those words. I did understand that if I was being called a sissy or if I was being called a queer, it meant that I was somehow insufficiently male, that I wasn't as much a boy or as good a boy as I was supposed to be. At the University of Alberta in Edmonton, there was a guy there whom I found extremely attractive. The attraction was reciprocal. We became inseparable. We would rent an apartment together. We wound up in bed together. And that was the first sexual experience with a guy for both of us. I was very happy about it, and he wasn't. At this point, I fully understood what it was that had been wrong with me all those years when I was growing up. And I was in love with this guy. I began to imagine right away what it would be like if he and I spent our life together. Is I realized in that moment that if we were to do that, I would probably never see my family again. Ultimately, I didn't have to make that choice because he responded quite negatively to that sexual experience that we had together. His relationship with me became increasingly abusive. He chased me around the apartment and cornered me in the bathtub and beat me up. My heart and my soul were more bruised than they had ever been by my father. And I made a conscious decision at that point that I wasn't going to have anything to do with men anymore, because in my experience, both times that I loved a man and wanted nothing but love in return, the first time being my father and the second time being this young man, I was beaten up. It was 6 years later that I married a woman and started having a family with her. I was ordained to the priesthood in the Orthodox Church. Was I tempted? Of course I was tempted. There certainly were lots of temptations along the way, only I never succumbed to any of them. I took my marriage vows very seriously. I took my priesthood very seriously. And but it wasn't just that. There was this memory in the back of my mind that if you're going to become involved with a man, you're going to get hurt. After 14 years of marriage, my wife separated from me for reasons that are still unclear to me, and 4 years later we divorced. My being gay had nothing to do with it because I was monogamous the whole time we were together, and she didn't know I was gay until 2 years after we were divorced. Because of her relentless efforts to alienate my kids from me, 3 of them have no relationship with me, including, unfortunately, my transgender son. Her declaring that we definitely were not going to get back together seemed to set me free to finally be myself. And I was 44 years old, as I mentioned earlier, when I had my second sexual experience with a guy. But I was still a priest, even though I wasn't functioning as a priest, and I was still an Orthodox Christian. And so I would go back and forth. I would have these periods where I would have sex with anything on 2 legs and a dick, to these periods of repentance, where I would stand before the icons or kneel before the icons, beating myself up and confessing my sins to God. I didn't decide to become an atheist. the way I experienced it was that the truth of atheism suddenly imposed itself upon me. I literally woke up one morning in October of 2008, and when I came fully awake, my mouth dropped open because I suddenly realized that I was an atheist. Only after several months did I begin to experience atheism as a liberation, believing that there is no afterlife, believing that when you're dead, you're dead. I think it takes a lot of inner strength to go on with life once you're faced with the finality of our mortality. When my daughter was in grade 12, she phoned me one morning and asked me if I could pick her up from school during her lunch break because she wanted to talk to me. So of course I did, and then she just came out and said, "I'm gay." And I said, "I actually love you more than I did before," because I recognize how much courage it must have taken for you to tell me this. And I went to a nearby florist and I selected a long stem white rose, and I got a card and I wrote a little message on it saying something about how much I love you, love Papa, and then I had them deliver it to the school. I left the florist and I went home and I cried for the rest of the afternoon. I think I was crying for two reasons. I was crying because I was afraid that she was going to lose her eternal salvation. And I was also crying in anticipation of whatever difficulties she might encounter socially as a gay person. My son said to me, "I have some news for you about Tatiana," meaning my daughter. "She's had a sex change." I started to cry so hard that I had to get up and leave the table and go into the other room. I never had the opportunity to transition with him. I never had the opportunity for him to come to me and say, "Papa, this is where I'm at, this is what I need to do." But I will say this, before I continue. At no point did I ever stop loving him at all. So it took me 3 years to come to terms with the fact that I no longer had a daughter. But I want to emphasize that I never once stopped loving him, and I never loved him any less than I had before. I went from not being able to talk about my transgender son without crying to having all kinds of other difficult thoughts and challenges to now. Not only do I talk about my transgender son very openly, but I do it very proudly. Even during my most difficult moments, I realized that the courage which I admired when he came out to me in high school was all the more amplified by the courage I saw in him now. I didn't understand why a person would want to transition. I've gone from being the devastated father of a transgender person to being one of the most outspoken advocates that I know for the transgender community. I'm very happy with my present and looking forward with a lot of anticipation and enthusiasm to my future. I've gone back to university. I'm in school full-time now, doing a major in psychology and a minor in sexuality studies. My intention is to stay in school until I have my doctorate and become a clinical psychologist, hopefully specializing in issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, and things of that nature. I'm also becoming more and more involved in the GLBT community. I'm a volunteer with Toronto P-Flag. I created and facilitate a queer support group at Glendon College. I'm a member of Gay Fathers of Toronto. Last July, I started a group called the West Enders. The past is the past. You make peace with it, with the things you don't like about your past. You're grateful for the things that you do like about your past, and then you just keep moving forward.